The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Well, welcome to the Chic Chattin time. Our normal guest, our host, Jocelyn, is busy taking care of her mother, and we're very happy that she's doing that. But I'm Karen Testerman, and I'm her co-host, and I'm looking forward today to interviewing Dan Richards, our New Hampshire constitutional scholar as of late. Thank you very much, Mike Lindell, for giving you that. Was it Mike that gave you that title?
It was actually Marilyn Todd who was being asked to speak during the symposium.
Oh, okay. So during the wonderful cyber symposium, it was Marilyn Todd, who's from Nashua, who actually deemed you with the New Hampshire Scholar. And I like that. It fits very, very well.
Thank you.
New Hampshire Constitutional Scholar. We can't forget that part.
Right.
One of the most important things is, of course, knowing your Constitution. And so if you're interested, this is a pocket Constitution that you can obtain. Just go to KarenTesterman.com. KarenTesterman.com, and you can find out how to get one of these pocket constitutions. Now, the special thing about this one is that it houses not only the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution, but it has the New Hampshire Constitution in it and the original 1783 Constitution, plus a couple of forewords that you probably would find very, very interesting in reading. So just wanted to put a little plug in there for I Choose to Live Free. We want to live free and not comply. So Dan, we have in front of our legislature, it's been in front of the courts, it seems like everything, what it is and what qualifies us to actually be a voting member of New Hampshire. And this seems to be muddied left and right over the last, well, as long as I've been in New Hampshire, which has been well over 20 years. We cannot settle on what really qualifies as a legal voter in New Hampshire. So now you've been doing some studying and found the answer, really. And if it could clear it all up, but meanwhile, the courts are saying that SB 3, I believe it was.
Exactly, yes.
Yep. Is unconstitutional, and they ruled it out.
That's right. The journey begins, let's first look at what SB 3 happens because of SB 3.
Right.
SB 3 and the other previous legislative changes to our voting laws have been declared unconstitutional. Not because they are in conflict with the state constitution, but rather they're in conflict with the U.S. Constitution. And so, in order to understand why, you have to go back to what does the Constitution actually require of a qualified voter. And so that is defined here in New Hampshire, most importantly, in 1783. In 1783, when our state constitution was ratified by the people of New Hampshire, the original one was in January 5th of 1776, but it wasn't ratified by the people because the Revolutionary War was literally around the corner. 6 months later, the Declaration of Independence is signed, and the Revolutionary War is off to the races. And so New Hampshire, through that process, like all the other colonies, fights the war. But the people of New Hampshire didn't ratify until 1783, October 31st. And when they did so, they wrote the voting laws for their own citizens because each state was now a former colony, right? They went from being a colony under the king to an independent sovereign state. And so when it writes its own voting laws, it writes it for its own citizens because the U.S. Constitution isn't even written yet. That won't happen for another 5 years. So that's why contextually it's so important to start at the beginning. Because then when the states all write this U.S. Constitution and they all agree to it, New Hampshire being the 9th state to ratify the Constitution on June 22nd, 1788. And when it did so, it established, hey, we'll sign this new form of government under these conditions. And I find it fascinating that when we look at the current federal overreach that is being talked about in Washington, D.C., I think it's called H.R. 1.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
H.R. 1. H.R. 1 emanates from the U.S. Constitution for this reason. The founding fathers of each of the states, when they wrote the U.S. Constitution, reserved voting as a right retained by the people of the several states. And now those qualifications are established in Article 1, Section 2. And so the people of the several states will elect their representatives for the Congress, the Senate, Vice President, and President. Now, the second part of that is those rules of who is going to vote for those federal offices are established by who?
The people of New Hampshire, right?
That's exactly right, by their state constitution.
Right.
And so that's what Article 1, Section 2 reaffirms, that whatever the constitution of a state requires for its largest body is the governing instrument. The second part is Article 1, Section 4. The time, manner, and place which elections ought to happen shall be established by the states, semicolon, in the sentence itself, because I'm paraphrasing, semicolon. And then in cases the federal government may, and the delegates of New Hampshire were smart enough to say, hold on, the first part of the paragraph reads, the state legislature shall, and then the second part says the federal government may. What's the deal? And they gave us why. They said the federal government can only interfere with the time, manner, and place in which state elections ought to be held if the states refuse.
So the state actually can refuse to set that time, place, and location.
Correct.
And and then that's the only time that the federal government could step in.
Absolutely. Now, here's the catch, though, is that it was a precondition for signing the Constitution. Unfortunately, it is not adopted into what we call the Federal Bill of Rights. So it just goes to the heart of original intent. In other words, it explains what the discrepancy was.
Right.
So we can be better prepared to debate the issue.
So let me stop you just a second. Where can people find this discussion that's going on? Because obviously it helps if you can go back and read what the debates were. It's similar to reading the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist papers, that you can actually see what was in the discussion anyway that was recorded on these. Is there a place that people can go and find that information?
Absolutely. State archives. We have a beautiful archive that has air control to maintain these old parchment documents. And in there, they have recorded to the best of their abilities some of the really, really early stuff. There's still some missing pages, but they have consolidated. Matter of fact, in your book, you have some of that. That's where it's called the early state papers. And so in those early state papers is actually the assembly of the legislative body for the first 4 years. You can actually read the House and Senate journals. And from then to today is all cataloged.
Oh, nice. And now, is this the building that's on Fruit Street in Concord?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's where I've done a lot of my research. Is I would use newhampshire.gov, and the founding fathers of New Hampshire were such brilliant men that what they did for us was they wrote in Article 98 that we have to timestamp to protect the Constitution and protect our way of life. We have to timestamp every time we change the state constitution. So if we make a wrong turn, we'll know where it was.
Okay.
And that was my roadmap. So when you read newhampshire.gov today, it tells you any place when you're reading an article, if it's been altered since the original 1784, it'll tell you when.
So the founding fathers actually anticipated that someone
that's right
on this side of the terms or of this side of the Constitution could actually go back and might think about maybe what we did in 1946, for example, just pulling a date out of thin air. Maybe what we did at that point is what caused all of this unintended consequence here. So maybe we need to go back and reestablish what was pre-1964 or whatever.
Absolutely. And that's how I found the changes to our voting laws.
Wow. That's awesome.
So from the state constitution and the U.S. Constitution comes our first important legislation in 1808.
Okay.
In 1808 is 20 years after the ratification and adaptation of the U.S. Constitution. So the Union's been alive now. We've had several U.S. presidents by this time, right? We're in, I think, our
Are we
third.
still operating under the Articles of Confederation? No, we're now
post,
past.
Right?
Right, okay.
As of June 22nd, 1788, when New Hampshire was the 9th state to ratify the Constitution, it became binding on those states ratifying it.
Okay. Okay.
And that's an important thing, too. Most people don't understand the U.S. Constitution is a corporation created for the states to do their business,
right,
to wage war on their behalf, to protect their ability to do trade and commerce, to negotiate peace in the event of a war, to arrange for international treaties and alliances, and, of course, to regulate commerce between the Indian tribes, the states, and foreign countries.
Yeah.
So it was binding on the states. The federal government, most people don't know this, but the federal government wasn't created for us. It was created for the businesses to do this, to protect their interest. And so that's the foundation.
And that's where we get a lot of, well, I don't want to go off on a rabbit trail, but it seems like that's where we get a lot of ambiguous kinds of legislation that we're doing this for the betterment of commerce.
Right.
And so anyway, we get ourselves in a lot of trouble that way. So now when the Founding Fathers were getting ready to, and it seems like New Hampshire was a holdout, and as far as, because they were the last state to agree, or the 9th state out of the 13. Was there something specific that they were trying to accomplish before they would agree to signing that Constitution, or was it just things that it was just a time problem with?
Well, the most important part of that question is what preceded the necessity to amend the Articles of Confederation, and that is written in great detail in the state constitution and its concerns. And that was the fact that getting back to interstate commerce, under the Articles of Confederation, under 13 independent countries, there were as many rules governing commerce between the states as there were state legislatures.
Yeah.
And there was also an unstable money supply because they had just fought a Revolutionary War where they were dependent on paper money from the Bank of England. Then they printed their own money here. And so that's a whole show on itself.
Wow.
But that whole process necessitated amending the Articles of Confederation. And so what we end up with, this goes to the heart of voting. In the end, to summarize the transition, is that you end up with a state constitution with a Bill of Rights and state citizens. We create a U.S. Constitution and a U.S. Bill of Rights and U.S. citizenship. So all Americans enjoy dual citizenship. They have rights, privileges, and immunities under their state constitution, and they have rights, privileges, and immunities under the U.S. Constitution. And knowing how the two work together. That's why that law of 1808 is so important to this conversation. What it explained in the law was this. Under the adoption of the U.S. Constitution, we have what's called the Privileges and Immunities Clause. That's Article 4, Section 2. And to paraphrase, the people of the several states, the citizens of the several states, are entitled to the same privileges and immunities of citizens of each state. What did that mean? That meant that if you were born in Massachusetts and you came to New Hampshire to do business, whether it's a job, whether it's to run a marketplace or do any type of business, you were to be treated the same. Your courts are fines, fees for business. Everyone must be treated the same. And so that's what a resident is entitled to. So someone born in California who wants to go to college at Dartmouth or UNH, right, is a citizen of California because they were born there and they're residing in New Hampshire while they're going to school here. They're engaged in a commercial activity. So they're protected only as residents because they're not citizens of New Hampshire. And so that's what that first law established. It established that What is a citizen of New Hampshire? And a citizen of New Hampshire is someone born here or someone who moves here, who immigrates here from one of the other sovereign states and then has to reside here long enough to become a citizen of the state. So that voter affidavit that we have, that used to be your state citizenship affidavit. It was changed.
Okay.
So,
when did they change that?
That was all because of the changes of 1973 and 76. So I'll get to that next. So this law goes into effect, and what they did was, in 1973, they removed the definition of a state citizen. They removed the language native born or naturalized.
Really?
Yes. And by removing that language in front of the word citizen of the United States, abolished what it was saying. In other words, it was excluding American citizens. It said American citizens who move to New Hampshire have to meet the residency requirement to be a citizen, not the right to vote.
So where do you find the requirement to be a citizen of the state of New Hampshire?
Well, they abolished its definition, and since then, we've not required it. So from that point on, so 1973, we get rid of the definition of what a state citizen is. Then we get a brand new voting chapter in 1964. That new chapter established Chapter 654, and now the citizen question is, are you an American citizen? No longer are you a citizen of the state. They're only going to refer to what every American is, a citizen of the United States.
So any American then can come in and tell New Hampshire, vote in New Hampshire to direct its spending, its whatever its business is, as if they were actually a citizen of New Hampshire, which is something that prior to that act or that constitutional amendment
Right.
Was restricted only for the people who actually had citizenship here in New Hampshire.
Absolutely.
Now, could they become naturalized in New Hampshire as well?
That's what the definition required. And the next section 2 identified how that happened. You would have to move here and meet the same requirements as required by federal law. Prove that you're a person of good character. That's the purpose of the residency requirement for citizenship. To prove that you're a good person to the community in which you want to now become a part of. A voting member, a contributor, you pay taxes, you support, you serve militia if called, jury duty on grand juries or petit juries. That's part of your civic responsibility. That's what's being lost. Voting isn't just a blanket right. It comes with duties and responsibilities and qualifications.
So you could technically be living here and not take on those responsibilities, which would then negate your ability to vote for it. That's the original plan.
Absolutely, because how is it fair for, if you're going to consent to a new form of government and you're going to consent to being taxed, what they did is they made sure only those people who are subject to the enforcement of the tax man are the ones who write for themselves the laws on how they get taxed.
Which is one of the complaints that people have against the college students being given the right to vote here when they don't really live here, they don't pay taxes here, and yet they're making a decision on how we are taxed or how that money is spent.
More to that, they bear no allegiance to the state.
Right.
They have no duty to serve in our state militia. They have no duty to pay our other than resident taxes. Yeah. And they have no duty to sit on a jury, and they have no right to vote. Now, they do have a right to vote in the state from whence they came.
Right.
Period.
So, that being the case, why in the world, if you are a student in New Hampshire and you go to apply to the University of New Hampshire to as a citizen or as a resident, you have certain requirements. They have to know that you are still on your parents' payroll, so to speak, that you are a dependent of your parents, or that you are independent. If you're independent, then that's a different story than if you are still, your parents are still paying the bill. Right. So you have to show that you are, in order to qualify for New Hampshire state residency, you have to show that you have a parent here or that you are independent living here.
Absolutely. And you know what their residency requirement is for in-state tuition? 12 months.
Oh, really?
12 months. So why is that? In other words, the state isn't going to surrender out-of-state revenue that they could garnish, because what is it, like 3 times as much for an out-of-stater? So before they're going to drop their tuition rates for an out-of-state student, they make you live here for a year.
So why don't we apply that to the state?
And these are the very people saying that we're going to withhold in-state tuition privileges from you until you've been here a year, but we're going to let you vote right away. No, it's because the Democratic Party and the ACLU have smartly exploited the weakness in the law. As soon as the state of New Hampshire started emphasizing that we are going to focus on, because here's the next thing that happens. In 1976, we're going to focus on the word domicile and not the word inhabitant. And that's the proposed change in 1976, that we're going to refer to eligible voters as those who have a domicile, and inhabitant will no longer be used as a word defining those with political rights. Those who can elect or be elected to office are defined by the state constitution and must be so as inhabitants.
Is that the same year that they removed the born or naturalized?
No, it was 3 years later. The legislature removed the descriptive language of a state citizen in 73. That was House Bill 363, because the legislature it was appropriate for them to define a state citizen. What it wasn't appropriate is what they do next. What they do next is they ignore the constitutional requirement that eligible voters are called inhabitants and that you have to be a citizen of the state. And from that point forward, our legislature is now writing its own rules as how it elects itself. That's appalling.
It is appalling.
But that's the argument. That's why they keep losing in court. Because they pass it, we get a couple elections, someone challenges it, normally the ACLU or the Democrats, because we're not in compliance or we're not in harmony with both constitutions.
So is there a path to straightening this out and to...
One item.
Okay.
Change the citizenship question back. Require state citizenship again. All the problems go away. Because see, then we get, as those who want to preserve our border, our way of life, our tax base, right, that which we absorb. It's not that the people of New Hampshire don't have a kind heart. We have tremendous amounts of charity within many aspects of our culture in this state.
Right.
So it's not that we don't want to, but we don't want that forced upon us. We can't be, that's what the federal government's supposed to protect the borders, to not create an influx of illegal immigration who are dependent on those producers. And that's what we're dealing with. So
how can the people who are watching this program get involved? How can they make this happen? Because now they understand what the problem is. What action do we need to take? Is it something that we have to go through our legislators to do, our state representatives or our state senators? Or is this something that we, the people, can, in a petition or something like that, make happen?
All of the above.
Oh.
First and foremost, your book or newhampshire.gov. If you're tight on resources and you're looking for the least expensive way to get knowledge, newhampshire.gov, it's free. It will walk you through the state constitution as it exists today. The other one is you need to start reading and have knowledge. If you don't know what your rights are, you don't have any. And I'll cover that real fast because I know we're going to run out of time. The state constitution is made up of two parts. It has 39 enumerated rights, and you have then a Part 2 form of government established to protect your rights. And if you don't know this, you have no way. Most people go to court and the judges kick out your complaint about your rights and they say you have no standing. Why? Because you're not bringing an action as a state citizen based on your state constitutional rights.
Oh, yeah.
That's the problem. And if you don't know your rights, you can't stand up for yourself.
Correct.
Next is to call your representatives. Would you hire someone and not oversee their work?
No. No,
would you hire someone and give them your checkbook?
No.
So why do we elect people and not oversee them? That's why making contact with your specific representative. Again, newhampshire.gov. Look up who your House representation is. Look up who your Senate representation. Make contact. Call them up. You need to know them and they need to know you because they work for you. They are trustees. And unless you establish that, because look, they've gotten so comfortable at ignoring the people, they don't want it. Most of the time it goes to answering machine. They don't return emails. They don't return snail mail. And so they're basically, once you elect them, and there's only one way that we, the people, are going to stop this. Now, every one of my representatives knows my name, knows my voice. My name comes up on caller ID. And so I've done what? I've established a relationship. Now we have a dialogue. So any disagreements we may have and or the education process, right? You have the right to instruct your representatives, but it requires knowledge.
Right.
And it begins with that element. And then, of course, the last one is the petition process. As you know, we're working in the courts. We've got a docket number. Those who want to follow my case have an appeal to the state Supreme Court. That case number is 2021-0325. I'll repeat. This year, 2021-0325. It's a docket for the state Supreme Court. We'll have a hearing in the fall. And this may resolve the issues on voting because the remonstrance is about repealing bad voting law.
Which is really interesting to me anyway, because in reality, we now find out that we, the people, need to know. I mean, we're unique in the United States because we have so many local representatives, and it's easy to get in touch with them. They're your neighbors.
Right.
And when you pick up the phone, you're not getting their secretary, it may be their wife, but you're not getting your normal secretary who's playing, protecting you from any phone calls. Your phone call is going into their home. And so this is really why we can point at them and say, you need to do such and such. But there's three pointing back at us saying we need to take the responsibility to hold them accountable.
Right.
So
you won't know if they're violating their constitutional oath if you don't know what your constitutional rights are. And those who don't like what's going on in our culture today, we, the people, are responsible because we've allowed it to happen by not being aware.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Dan Richard, our New Hampshire constitutional scholar.
Thank you,
I
Karen.
appreciate your coming on Chic Chattin, and we'll have you on again, I hope.
Thank you.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.